Well,
Is Dilini on?
welcome everyone for this talk on the palm flora of Sri Lanka, delivered by Neela de Zoysa and Dilini Wickramasinghe. Neela is speaking from the USA. She's a botanist who revised Arecaceae, the palm family, for the Revised Handbook to the Flora of Ceylon. In the mid-1980s, she led the research effort at the Forest Department to bring wild rattans into cultivation and authored the illustrated field guide to the rattans of Sri Lanka. And Dilini Wickramasinghe is a graduate of the Department of Forestry and Environmental Science at the University of Sri Jayewardenepura, where she conducted research on the invasive Areca triandra. So this is going to be a joint presentation, and Neela will speak first and then hand over to Dilini, who will be speaking from Colombo. Please keep your microphones muted. We will take questions at the conclusion of both talks. And if you have any questions, please put them on the chat box, and we will take the questions one by one at the end. So with that, welcome, Neela. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say about the intriguing palm flora of Sri Lanka.
Okay. Welcome, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Malik Fernando, for that kind introduction. Our thanks, both Dilini and I would like to thank the Sri Lanka Natural History Society for this opportunity to present on the palm flora of Sri Lanka. So I have a cover slide here, which shows a misty morning in Singharaja. You can see a familiar combination of palms. I think earlier Inoka was trying to see which ones they were. So you can see the coconut close to the foreground and the Caryota, the kitul palm at the back here, and way back in the distance are two Areca nut palms. So with that, I will get started. I do want to take a minute to dedicate this talk to my teacher and mentor, Professor M.D. Dasanayake. He was the general editor of the Revised Handbook to the Flora of Ceylon, president of the Sri Lanka Natural History Society in 1968. Many of you in the audience here who may have known him knows that he was such a patient teacher and mentor to many, and I was very fortunate to receive his generosity. He was also the first head of the Department of Botany at the University of Peradeniya. Before I get started, I also want to say a special thank you to many naturalists who contributed their stunning photographs for this presentation. This presentation could not have been possible without their generosity, because I did not have pictures from decades ago that were usable. So I do want to thank Pradeep Rajateva, who and the Flora of Sri Lanka website, who generously allowed me to use pictures. Vimukti Viratunga, Dr. Himesh Jayasinghe, and T. Shahiraj from Akkarepattu. So with that, I'll just mention a few general facts about palms, because I'd like to give a very brief introduction so that we can see the Sri Lankan palms in context. Think about it. I'm assuming anyone can recognize a palm, right? And the reason, I think, is because palms have this particular kind of architecture. They're iconic, especially on the tropical landscape. They are very large in size. They have this very unusual proportions with a massive crown and a terminal tuft of leaves. And they also have, I have a nice picture here from Akre from the Manankulam estate, which shows a grove of palmyrah palms. And it is a highly successful monocot group. So around the world, there are about 180 genera of palms and 2,600 species. And as this map shows, they are limited to tropical and subtropical regions, but they are highly diverse in terms of where they will grow, from rainforest to desert. So that's why I also titled this talk, The Intriguing Palm Flora, because as you go through the Sri Lankan palms, you will see how big that diversity is within this kind of specialized architecture. So now I want to introduce you very quickly in the same context from the global palms, where there are 2,600 species, to the native palms in Sri Lanka. So we have 9 genera, 18 species, out of which half are endemic. So we have this little graph that we prepared just to show you a quick overview, and then I will, dissect it a little bit as we go through the different species. So the list of palms are on the right. We have, as I said, 9 endemic species. And then we have another 9 non-endemic species. And then right at the bottom, we have some non-native palms, which are very familiar, obviously, like the coconut palm, the Areca palm, and the Areca triandra, which Dilini will talk about later, and then the expanding plantations of the oil palm, Ileus guyanensis. So I want to spend 1 minute on this slide to give you a little overview, so it will be easy as we go through the individual palms for you to get a sense of the Sri Lankan palm flora. So you can see that 5 of our, no, about 10 of these 18 species are on the red list as either endangered or vulnerable, and 1 non-endemic species is near threatened. So that is the situation with our palms. So quite a few of our palms, so more than half of them, are in some threatened category. And if you look at the little maps on the right-hand side, you will also see that in addition to the endemic palms, the 10 endemic palms, the non-endemics are also mostly restricted to the Deccan Plate, India and Sri Lanka. So in that sense also, they're quite restricted geographically. Only 2 of our native palms, the palmyrah palm and the Nipa frutigans, are distributed beyond that Deccan peninsula into other parts of Asia and even Northern Australia in the case of Nipa fruticans. Then coming back to the endemic palms, you will see also that most of the endemic palms, if you look at the map on the figure on the left hand, you'll see that they're all restricted to that little bit of the wet zone where we know the forests are fragmented and things are dire. And so all our endemic palms are threatened. So if you look at all the red letters I have put in, they are endangered, vulnerable. All 9 of them are either endangered or vulnerable. So I just wanted to give you that little overview before I go on to looking at the separate palms. So keep this picture in mind. And then you can see here also, most of the species, the green section is all rattans, Calamus. So that's our largest palm genus. And then we have the red circle shows you all the endemic palms. So one more quick detail, just to explain characteristics of palm. So as we go through the species, again, you will see the biological diversity. I have a quick diagram of the coconut palm on the very left to show how a palm ends up with that massive crown of leaves, all like a little tuft at the the top of the growing stem. So most palms are unbranched. They just have one single stem. And then the growing meristem is very compacted. So even though it is growing, within very short spaces, the leaves start to come out, and in between the leaves are the inflorescences. So I just wanted to show you that architecture, that's how palms end up with that tuft of leaves at the top. And in the middle picture, I have just circled in red the type of palm architecture and arrangement you will see among the palms in Sri Lanka. So the first one here that my cursor is on, that is kind of the typical palm architecture that you see here on the coconut palm. And then the next one is a clustering palm. It doesn't have a single stem, similar to Areca triandra, which is the introduced palm. And then the one here on the right shows horizontal branching, which is a case of Nipa fruticans. And in both these, just like in the coconut palm, the flowering is in an ascending order. So they flower as the plant grows. The flowers will be interspersed between the leaves. But then in this bottom row, we have two other types of palms, which are unusual. Or about 5% of palms are what we call hapaxanthic. That means they terminate their main growth and then they flower downwards in descending order. So the kitul palm is one example. And then the talipot palm is a bit of an extreme where it puts out one single massive flower at the end of its life. Then moving on to the right hand figures of leaves. Palms also have many different leaf types. So you have these fan-shaped leaves, like in the talipot or the palmyrah palms, plain pinnate leaves, like in a coconut palm. Then in others, you get them arranged three-dimensionally. And in the case of a kitul palm, they are what we call bipinnate. That means they are divided more than once, and you have little leaflets. So again, if anyone wondered why palms are called palms, what do you think? So those fan-shaped leaves are what we call palm-shaped leaves, right? They're like a palm with fingers sticking out. So that's the origin of the word palms, is because of their palm-shaped leaves. So with that, I will go on to look, now that you have some background about the overview of how many species we have in Sri Lanka, and a few details about palm architecture, you can now see all our Sri Lankan palms in some context. So first one is our most familiar coconut palm, Cocos nucifera. And what would Sri Lanka be without coconuts, right? So this palm, of course, was brought here, maybe by the Portuguese originally, but then it's the British who really expanded coconut as a plantation crop, and it's cultivated all around the tropics. What people may not know is that Cocos nucifera is what we call a monospecific species. That means there's only one species in the genus Cocos, and it is native to Northern Australia, New Guinea, Philippine Islands, and that region. And if you look at the bottom right picture, you will see that there are some wild coconut populations that have been identified, and genetic studies have been done about how the coconut has spread over the thousands of years. And the wild coconut tends to be very long and angular with a very small endocarp. Whereas we have bred the cultivated coconut to be very round, large fruits with a lot of endocarp in the middle, which is, of course, the part we use for food. I also want to use the coconut palm, Cocos nucifera, just to explain a few details about the coconut flower. And then, of course, I will explain a lot of variations as we go in the different palm species, since this is the most familiar and available palm, I thought this one would be a good way to explain some of those details. So you can see that the palm flower is always enclosed in a sheath. We call it the spathe. So on the very left picture, of course, we are all familiar because it has a lot of ceremonial importance. We use that unopened young tender palm flower for a lot of ceremonial purposes. So you can see here, when it opens up in this middle picture, you have a lot of small male flowers that carry the pollen on the long stems, very tiny little flowers. And then those round flowers, they are actually the female flowers that eventually become the fruits. So you can see many palms are insect pollinated, so you can see the bees visiting those little opened male flowers. So now I get to our first native palm, which is the palmyrah or the Borassus flabellifer. There are about 5 or 6 species of Borassus around the world, in Africa and Asia. This is a coastal plant. Again, you can see on that little map of Sri Lanka, it grows mostly on the east and the north and the east coasts, and also extending to that northwest and southeast arid areas. It is, it's also frequently cultivated as live fences, and it has, in contrast to the coconut palm, which had a pinnate leaf with leaflets separate along a long rachis, the Borassus or the palmyrah palm has a fan-shaped leaf, which I have shown on that upper right-hand corner. And then this palm is a little different. I have these really great photographs sent to me by T. Shahiraj from Akrepattu. So this palm is what we call dioecious. That means the male and female flowers are on separate trees. So the upper picture shows the male inflorescences, long finger-like inflorescent stems on which you have very, very tiny flowers almost embedded, and you can see that pollinator visiting. And then in the female plant, just like as I showed you with the coconut, you get these little globular female flowers, which once pollinated become the fruits shown on the right-hand side. And of course, when those fruits ripen, they're very sweet and juicy and have a lot of yellow pulp in it. I also wanted to mention, of course, palms are one of the most useful groups of plants to humankind. And the Borassus or the palmyrah palm, of course, has a long history going back some 6,000 years. And there's a wonderful epic poem, Tamil poem called Thala Vilasam, which documents some 801 uses of the palmyrah palm, including, of course, this kind of palmate leaves are also been used as writing material for even things like the Sanskrit alphabet, and they think that some of these uses go back 4,000 to 6,000 years. So another coastal palm, and this one in total contrast to the Borassus we saw, which is, of course, a magnificent and tall, Nipa fruticans, or the gingpol, as it is called in Sinhalese. It's estuarine, and it grows in a lot of waterways along river mouths and lagoons. The Sinhala name comes from the plant growing along the estuary of the Ginganga. It looks a little bit like a juvenile palm, quite dramatic in its own way. The plant has horizontal stems, as you can see in that little diagram above, which actually branches underwater. So even though you think that they're all separate plants, they're actually branches of one tree that may be quite spread out. The flowers are also quite distinct. The female and male flowers are on the same plant, but you can see they're kind of bright orange. The female flower is in that little globular structure, and the male flower, as you can see, that little plume-like thing to the upper right. And then once they mature, pollinate and mature, the female flower becomes, again, that spherical cluster of fruits, and the individual fruits are shown. And the bottom, just like coconuts, these are also water dispersed, and therefore they're very fibrous and light, and have very spongy tissue that help them float in the water. So this, just like the palmyrah palm, is our only second native palm that extends beyond Asia. You know, it goes all the way to Northern Australia. You can see on the map on the upper right. So this palm, unfortunately, is categorized as vulnerable. As we know, in the coastal area, exactly where that Nipa fruticans grows, on that west coast of Sri Lanka, it's one of the most densely populated areas, a lot of pollution, a lot of habitat destruction. So moving on to Caryota urens, the fishtail palm or kitul. Of course, this is as familiar to us as the coconut palm, because it provides us with our favorite sweetener. This grows in wet and intermediate forests, in village home gardens, and in natural settings. It is found mostly in forest gaps. It's also quite widespread. You can see on that Sri Lanka map, it grows in the wet and intermediate zone. And in terms of its distribution beyond Sri Lanka, it's also limited. Natural distribution is limited to the Deccan Peninsula, India and Sri Lanka. That's the green part on that upper right-hand, the map on the upper right-hand corner, and the purple area shows that it is widely cultivated in other parts of Asia because of its usefulness. Now, in English, it is called the fishtail palm because of these bipinnate leaves, these twice divided leaves with these little leaflets that look like a fish's tail. In contrast to the other palms we saw so far, this one, kitul palm, has those inflorescences that grow in descending order, appear in descending order down the trunk. As the tree grows older, it stops growing, and then the flowers start to be produced in descending order. And they're also in this big cascade of drooping branches. So you can see male and female flowers are held together along those long pendulous branches, and they produce these fruits, which are high in uric acid, which have oxalic acid, which are quite irritating to the skin, which I understand is the reason for the species name urens. So I thought I will just show you a couple of pictures of the tapping of the sugar palm, because this also has a lot in common with the two other palms we tap for sugar sap, that is the coconut and the palmyrah. So the part of the plant we use for the sugar sap is the young inflorescence. So it requires a lot of traditional knowledge to know exactly when to tap that young inflorescence. So you can see on the right-hand picture, they bind the inflorescence to keep it from bursting open. And at that exact right time, when the plant is investing all its energy into this inflorescence so that it can produce the flowers and the fruits for reproduction, they will slice it halfway through, and then it just keeps, pouring out all that sugar sap, which is then collected, boiled down, and made into treacle or into jaggery. And this is also the process for palmyrah, where both the male and female plants can be tapped, and also for coconut. So now on to one of our most interesting palms, the Corypha umbraculifera, or the talipot palm. In Sinhalese also called tala. It is native to the hill country and it is associated with Buddhist temples. So you can see that small area in the Sri Lankan map, which shows where this grows. It's found in a kind of semi-natural setting. It is not found in the wild, although scientists think that this was available in the wild once, and there are a few other corypha palms in Asia. So this palm has very large fan-shaped leaves, similar to the palmyrah palm, and it is thought to be one of the largest leaves in the plant kingdom. Leaves are used just like as with the palmyrah palm as a writing material. And again, many of us are familiar with the puskolapot. That means the leaves which were used for writing Buddhist scripture. And so this fan-shaped leaved palms has been used for many thousands of years as writing material. So the one thing I also want to mention, of course, as you're looking at this palm, is that massive inflorescence. So you can see on the picture on the left hand, a palm before it flowers, and then the palm at the back where the leaves start drooping downwards, and this massive branched inflorescence has come out with a lot of very tiny flowers, and I will show you a close-up. And then on the right-hand picture, it shows that those flowers have now gone into fruit, and so it has that kind of dark appearance. So this tree is considered the largest inflorescence in the plant kingdom. And this plant is quite exceptional in that it has this massive end-of-life reproductive event. So it grows between 30 to 80 years, can grow up to 20 meters in height. Of course, if it's in a more sunny, exposed place, it can flower earlier. But if it's in a nutrient-rich, secluded place, it can grow up to 80 years before it flowers. And the inflorescence is 8 meters in length. And one study where it's flowered in the Fairchild Botanic Garden in Florida, which actually counted those very tiny flowers, estimated there were about 24 million flowers on this inflorescence. Stalks laid end to end can be almost 8,000 meters. And after pollination, the fruits take about another year to mature. And once this job is done, the palm dies. So if you go on the internet, you have a lot of very colorful language. It's called the suicide palm. It's called, all kinds of things because of this very dramatic reproductive strategy of this palm. Okay, so moving on to a fairly low-key palm in contrast to the talipot. This is a wild date, Phoenix pusilla. We call it Indi, Inchu. It is probably the most wide-ranging palm. If you look at that Sri Lankan map, it grows everywhere other than in the hill country and the mountains, dry and wet zone in secondary vegetation. It's also limited to Sri Lanka and India. And this one again is a dioecious palm. So the male and female flowers appear on separate palms. Therefore, the fruits will appear only on the female palm. So this is related to the date palm. We have a handful of palms in that Phoenix group. And it also has very sharp needle-like ends to these very spiny leaves. So that ends most of the main non-native palms. So I'm going to move on. If you remember, I asked you to keep that little figure in mind. So now we're moving on to the endemic palms. And this palm, the Loxococcus rupicola, is probably the most important Sri Lankan palm because it is a endemic genus. Loxococcus is an endemic genus found only in Sri Lanka, and it is also a monospecific genus. That means it has only one species. In Sinhalese, we call it dothalu. It is endangered, and you can see it's only found in a very small area in Sri Lanka. I know there are many people here, including Vimukti Viratunga, Dr. Himesh, and maybe Pradeep Prajateva, who may be able to give us more information now about, exactly where these palms are growing. You find them in Kandy and Ratnapura district. It's as you can see, it's looks like an Areca nut palm, and what is so spectacular about it is the inflorescence, which is deep red. So before it flowers, you can see these kind of yellow tips of the petals, and then so beautiful when it opens. And interestingly, once it finishes flowering and fruits, it becomes this very dull green fruits that are not particularly interesting looking. So quite a contrast. So this palm is endangered, needless to say, for all these reasons, because it's an endemic genus. It's restricted to Sri Lanka, then restricted to a very small part in Sri Lanka, very specific habitats. And one of its main threats is because of its rarity and its beauty. It has traditionally been offered as a floral offering in Buddhist ceremonies. So here on the left is an unopened inflorescence collected for offering that I got from an article on Manga Bay, which talked about the threats to peak wilderness. And then on the right is an inflorescence offered at a Buddhist shrine. So I think it's really important to educate the public on this, that because it's rare and it's beautiful, it has traditionally been considered a very coveted and offering, very sacred offering. And I think it's important to educate the public that this is not a good idea. So the next species, endemic species, is Oncospoma fasciculatum, kitul, called kitul for good reason. That upper top picture on the right hand, you can see it has these most fierce looking thorny rings of thorns, which maybe it's not the best picture, but it's, I haven't given it large enough, but it is a pretty fierce looking palm. It grows in forest gaps in the wet zone. I have seen it almost growing side by side or with the Loxococcus, which you would find on the humid, wet side of a slope, and on the dry side of a slope, often you will find the kitul or the Oncospoma. So this is the first palm we are seeing with different type of leaves. So these are kind of bottle brush-like leaves with the leaflets arranged all around the rachis, unlike, say, the coconut palm, which had leaflets on the same plane. And they also grow in large groups sometimes when the environment is right for them. So you can see that picture on the left with a lot of Oncospoma palms. And the bottle brush-like leaves are also reminiscent of maybe the oil palm and the royal palm, that we see in cultivation. That beautiful white inflorescence with the young white unopened male flowers that grow together with the female flowers that then become the fruits, which is on that upper right picture. So this palm is vulnerable according to our national red list. So now I will move on to my specialty, the rattans, or the climbing palms. I know a lot of you are probably waiting to hear this section because these are not particularly familiar palms to most people. And I have been studying them for many years, and I wrote a field guide, which is on the bottom right. I've reproduced our little figure here so you can kind of see where I'm going. So this whole green section are the Calamus species. We have 10 species, so that is more than half of our native palm species are Calamus. And you can see that we have 6 endemic species, all of them are threatened. And out of the non-native 4 species, 1 species is near threatened. So one quick word about the Calamus. I have 2 black and white line drawings which show that these are climbing palms. So unlike that picture I showed you right at the beginning of how a palm ends up with that concentrated tuft of leaves at the top of its stem, the climbing palms are different because they're climbing, they get very elongated. So there's a lot of space in between each of these palm leaves. And then they also climb with these 2 interesting features. So some palms have what you call a cirrus or a flagellum at the very tip of its leaf. So 2 of our large diameter species have that appendage that by which it kind of latches on to surrounding vegetation and hauls itself up. On the right-hand picture is the other strategy where for the smaller diameter palms, they have a lateral flagellum where it is a sterile inflorescence that actually is fused to the leaf sheath that helps it latch on to surrounding vegetation and helps it climb. So here I'll give you a very quick overview of these rattan palms. Of course, anyone who has gone to Singaraja will see this dramatic sight, which is a wonderful picture that Vimukti Veeratunga gave us to, which we use for our flyer, and is here. It's a mixture of both Calamus ovoideus and Calamus zeylanicus, are 2 large diameter rattans. And I have the contrast here of the stems. On the left is Calamus ovoideus. Again, the singular name is quite telling. It says Tudarana because of that leaf tip is extended. It has uniformly distributed kind of dark brown spines on the stem, whereas the Calamus zeylanicus, called tambotuel, again, singular name is quite suggestive because it's copper colored, tambo colored, it's called tambotuel, has very clear circular arrangement of spines. It becomes a little less clear, the circles, as the stem matures, but it still has quite a golden hue. And I have on the right hand, again, a very nice photograph by Dr. Himesh of that very fierce cirrus with those recurved spines on it. Very, very nasty work when you're trying to make herbarium specimens and collect some of these and measure them. They weren't fun to work with. And so the Calamus ovoideus is vulnerable and Calamus zeylanicus is endangered. And they're both restricted to the wet zone and to, of course, only to large pockets of forest where there's space for this kind of a large palm and has enough tall vegetation for it to climb. One more point about rattans. Now, rattans are also dioecious. That means male and female plants are separate. Male flowers are born, as you can see here on the Calamus ovoideus, is kind of vague brown part. You can see that is a very long, pendulous, trailing male inflorescence, and this is a close-up of the flowers. I couldn't find pictures of Calamus ovoideus for this, so I have an illustration from the Flora of Ceylon by Malini Gunatilaka. So you can see the fruits are ovoid, oval-shaped, whereas in the Calamus zeylanicus, the fruits are quite globular. And this brings me to another unique feature about rattans is the fruit. They have these scales which is not found in any other palm fruit in Sri Lanka or otherwise. So it's usually the Calamus species that have these unique scaly fruits. So the next large diameter rattan is Calamus thwaitii, marvevel. Also grows in forest gaps. It has lateral flagella. It's also quite widely distributed in intermediate zone and wet zone. It kind of creeps as opposed to those two other species we saw that climb very erect because it has those cirruses at the end of the leaf tips. It climbs in a very different strategy. This one has this very long black spines in very distinct circles. So just a word about the propagation of wild rattan species I was involved in at the Forest Department in the 1980s. These are the rattan nurseries in Kudava in Singaraja, where we propagated hundreds and thousands of seedlings and some rattan trial plots in the Pinus caribea plantations in the buffer zones of Singaraja. And that's me standing there a long time ago. So moving on to the mid-diameter rattans, I'll go through them quickly. So this is our most familiar Polonnaruevel, which is a floodplain species. Again, it's non-native, but near threatened because of overexploitation. You can find them in the Mahaveli floodplains, in the Manampiti area, in large groves. So, this used to be the main supply of rattan for our rattan industry, but unfortunately it is now becoming scarce, and on the red list it is listed as near threatened, yeah. Then Calamus metzianus, aloe or kahawevel, native medium diameter species that grows in forest gaps. It's a little bit restricted to the intermediate zone. Calamus pseudostenuis or heenwevel, medium diameter, found in forest gaps in the wet zone. Calamus delicatulus, very rare species, endangered. Usually, some of these rattans are not that well known, so this one is identified with this very distinct tuft of spines at the leaf, at the point of the leaf sheath and the stem. And then two small diameter rattans called kukuluvel, which grow in the forest understory. I think the word kukuluvel has come from this, the three leaflets which look like a bird's foot. So both these are vulnerable. The Calamus digitatus has these broad dark green leaflets, whereas the Calamus radiatus has a more radiating lighter green narrow leaflets. And then I get to the most rarest of our rattans, the Calamus pakisteminus. I want to thank Dr. Himesh Jayasinghe for providing me with these photographs. He's probably one of the few people who have seen and photographed this. Even as far back as the 1800s, I think in Tryman's book, no one has actually seen the female flowers of this plant, only male flowers, and I have taken the liberty of producing the Tryman plate here of what this plant looks like. And because they are dioecious species where male and female plants are separate, I don't even know whether it's reproducing anymore, if the female plants have disappeared. And we may be looking at male plants that have been around for a very long time. So before I hand over to Dilini, I'll just have one quick picture, just to reminisce about old days. I don't know if Aruna Veerasurya is here. He's a professor now at Texas A&M Prairie View. So that's Aruna, then Vimukti and Rambanda from the herbarium staff, and lots of Forest Department staff on those amazing days when we collected and studied many of these palms. So with that, I want to hand over the Areca species, which Dilini Wickramasinghe will talk about. So Dilini, please go ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Neela, for that excellent description of the palm species. So next slide. My story is about 3 Areca species, one endemic, highly endangered and not well known. The second one is our familiar puak, and the third one is an introduced ornamental, which I have been studying. Next slide. When moving on to the first species, Arecaceae, the native range of this palm is Philippines, and it is commonly found in home gardens in intermediate and wet lowlands of Sri Lanka. When talking about the morphology of this species, the stem is slender, leaves are pinnate, flowers are pale yellow with 6 stamens, and the fruits are ovoid and orange in color. So the seeds are used for chewing with betel leaves. Flowers are used for religious purposes, and this is also a medicinal plant. Next slide. So the second species is Areca consina, which is an endemic endangered palm, locally called as Leenathari, which is protected under Flora and Fauna Protection Ordinance. This is only found in a few locations in Kalutara district, and it is its natural habitat is swamp forests. So when talking about the morphology, it has a single stem. Inflorescence and infructescence are branched only once, producing few flowers and few ovoid-shaped fruits. Also, the male flower has 6 stamens in this species. So we can say that there's an urgent need to conserve this species through in situ conservation. Next slide. Let's move on to the third species. As we mentioned earlier, palms are economically important as food, such as coconut, date palm, and oil palm. Also, there's a major economic aspect of palms which are used as ornamentals in horticulture and landscaping. So when talking about Areca triandra, it is native from West Bengal to Philippines, and it's naturalized in China, Panama, and Hawaii Pacific regions. Also, this is one of the 12 invasive palms in the tropical region. As an example, the understory of the Gamboa forest in Panama, which is a tropical region, is completely dominated by this species. So, Areca triandra was introduced to Sri Lanka in 1867 through Royal Botanic Gardens, Peradeniya, and it has grown as an ornamental in urban gardens and home gardens for over a century. Also, the seeds are used as a substitute for areca nuts as well. And this species also locally called as Leenathari and dothalu. There's a long-standing confusion between Areca triandra and Areca consina due to similar morphology. So to distinguish this species from Areca consina, we can use its clustering stems, inflorescence and infructescence branched twice, producing a large number of flowers and fruits, where the fruits are ellipsoid to ovoid shape. Also, the male flower contains 3 stamens in this species. The next slide.
Which is why it's called triandra, right? Will it help if I go back to the previous slide, Dilini, so people can get the difference again? Yeah, so that's Areca consina. You can see the very few larger fruits, and this one is a common plant. Okay, so.
Next slide. As you can see in this map, it is currently naturalized in the southwest humid lowlands, commonly observed in forest edges and disturbed forest patches like Indicada Mookalana, Wagga, Mithirigala, also in plantation states in Avisavilla area. So it has highly efficient reproductive strategies with clustered stems, high fruit production, attracting birds like quail, hornbill. So we can say that there's a vulnerability of highly fragmented biodiverse rainforests of Sri Lanka, which have a high conservation value. Therefore, the horticulture industry needs to be more aware and better regulated when species are introduced. So we have submitted our findings to the International Botanic Congress, and we are awaiting the publication in Nordic Journal of Botany as well.
So does that bring us to the conclusion, Dilini?
Yeah. Yes, Ms. Neela.
Okay, so I want to finish with some acknowledgements. Again, as I said, this presentation would not have been possible without the very generous availability of stunning photographs by Pradeep Rajateva and his Flora of Sri Lanka website, and all the people mentioned here whose pictures we have used. Dr. Himesh Jayasinghe at IFS and Vimukti Veeratunga, my old friend from the Forest Department, who has also joined me in much of my fieldwork from Cinnamon Trails, and T. Shahiraj from Manakulam Estate in Akkarepattu. And again, I want to, I've acknowledged use from the Flora of Ceylon, primary plates, maps from Q Plants of the World online, staff, amazing staff of the Forest Department, field staff who over the years have helped in many ways, the Royal Botanic Gardens, Peradeniya, the herbarium. And I think, Dilini, you would like to thank.
Yes, I would like to thank all the lecturers and the non-academic staff of the Department of Forestry and Environmental Science, University of Sri Jayewardenepura, and my research supervisors, Dr. Tilakavansha Chandratilaka, Pradeep Rajateva, also Dr. Magdan Jayasuriya. And also I would like to thank all my friends and my family for their continuous support.
Okay, so that ends our talk. Should I stop sharing my screen and we have a few minutes for questions?
Thank you. Thank you very much, both of you, for that very interesting presentation and those beautiful photographs. Yes, I think you could stop sharing your picture now, your screen. Neela and Dilini are available for answering questions. There are no questions that have been posted on the chat box. If anyone wants to unmute and ask a question, please do so.
Hello.
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, hello, Lester. Nice to have you.
Lester.
Thank you.
Hi, Neela. Is any measures taken to preserve some of these critically endangered in the department, especially the Areca consina?
So good question.
Right.
I'm happy to see that Dr. Himesh Jayasinghe, Vimukti, Pradeep, lots of people who are very knowledgeable about the situation, field situation, are available to answer some of these questions at the field level. So maybe I'll call upon someone else who's more knowledgeable. And so part of the problem, from what I understand, right, Dilini, you can confirm this, and I think Pradeep Rajateva is the one who brought it to my attention. Part of the problem has been, until our study, Areca triandra, the introduced species, has for decades been confused with our endemic consina. So therefore, people have just continued to encourage the introduced species, thinking that it was the endemic species. So can someone talk more about it? I mean, and feel free to speak in any language,
I think one or two more introduced plants, ornamental palms, which are, I think there's also the introduced new ornamental kitul, a fishtail palm, which is a smaller one, which is also found in some gardens.
I think called Caryota mitis. It's a clustering Caryota, small proportion, so it's also quite popular as an ornamental, even in the southern US.
Yeah, I've seen a similar species in the Andamans. Yeah.
Himesh,
Neela, this is Vimukti.
Vimukti, can you answer Lester's question?
I think the excellent presentation of the plants that are always under the radar of the general public. I think the Dilini and you have pointed out two main points about what do you call the buak species, the Arecaceae and the other one. That's actually lack of knowledge has become a huge issue. People thought that the introduced one is the Arecaceae, and it just keeps going. But no one is taking any steps to address the issue. That's the sad part of it. And also another thing that Dilini has pointed out, that the introduced one is rapidly progressing its range due to the common birds that have been dispersing this particular species. So I think we need to take very quick action. I mean, maybe the Royal Botanic Garden or the Forestry Department or whoever it is, and try to distinguish these two in terms of the science, and which is available now. You guys are talking about it. And then maybe people like Dr. Himesh and Dr. Martin Jayewardenepura, whoever it is, the experts should come together and discuss with the Ministry of Environment and the IUCN to see this is how you distinguish these two species, and the management decision must be taken immediately. Otherwise, as you said, that the Panama it has gone to the uncontrollable situation, and which we may see in the western of Sri Lanka very soon, at the rate that the introduced one is rapidly progressing in its range. So that's my comment. I think the Himesh might be able to say something about Fancy now also.
Yeah, he says he's in a noisy place. So if I'm not putting Dr. Swenning on the spot, I see you're in the audience. And I know the situation of Areca triandra in Panama was mentioned, and I know you're the one who first recorded it. Would you like to say something? Okay, I don't hear a response.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for asking. Sorry, I was a bit late in answering. It's my computer's just lagging right now. I'm doing some other stuff on it, so that's why. But no, I can quickly comment. So my observations in Panama are from a long time ago, from 2000 and 2001. So I'd be curious to see an update, but at the time, locally, Areca triandra was super successful in the understory, along with various other introduced species. So and it looked like to have potential to expand quite a lot, I would say, but it was very localized that we saw it, because it wasn't planted so widely. It was mainly in some kind of peri-urban settings.
So anyway, but because your documentation was the only thing we had to go on when we started this study, and that was at least gave us confidence that we were on the right track.
Yes, no, I think the issue of alien palm invasions is a super important and likely very widespread phenomenon. So a PhD student of mine worked with this for a few years ago, both in a European context and in an American context. And there are many cases from Brazil from California, from Mexico, and from Southern Europe, and we also found other cases, and many of them are quite substantial. So because palms are so useful, they're being planted many places and widely outside their range, and many of them are quite good at establishing in nature. So it's happening widely. We were interested in asking in an open-minded manner what were the consequences of these invasions. I mean, there are many negative connotations, but maybe sometimes it's not so bad after all in an objective sense. So that was what we were looking into, and we are still actually working on that. And I think the answer is complicated. Sometimes it can be likely quite negative for certain other species, but in other cases it's maybe, especially in the context of climate change and other things that are happening, maybe it's actually more sort of you can say an adaptive response actually. So it's complicated but super interesting.
Yeah, and in general, I think what I observed when preparing the talk is also that we take our palms so much for granted because some are so familiar and useful, but then we have more than half of our palms are endemic, and they're on the red list as threatened. So, and especially the Areca concina in this particular case is only found in 2 locations, as Pradeep has pointed out, and those are some of our most densely populated, most earliest settled, in colonial times in that southwest coast. So our swamp forests are now totally gone, except 1 or 2 very tiny locations which have a huge concentration of endemic genera, like Stemenoporus, lots of other things. And so I think we need to pay more attention. So anyway, thank you for your questions.
There are a number of questions that have been posted on the chat, and we'd like to take them. Let me get to the top. Sherina Mendra asks, comments, the palms of Florida look very similar. Are any of them found in Sri Lanka?
I'm not aware. I know a lot of tropical palms from other parts of the world are grown in Florida. Whether I'm not aware of any palms from Florida in Sri Lanka. I mean, there may be some in the botanic gardens or maybe in private gardens, but I'm not aware of it.
Thank you. I had a leaflet which had all the palms of Florida, and many appeared to be similar, but the names were different.
Yeah, as I said, there are some 2,600 palm species.
Thank you.
So there's a lot of palms that look similar, like the palmetto palms, which Florida is so famous for, the saw palmetto.
Thank you.
There's a question about whether tissue culture techniques cannot be used to propagate threatened species.
Someone else will have to answer that. Is anyone here who's knowledgeable about cloning? I mean, we do it for other species, but I don't know, maybe something like coconut, but I'm not aware of.
Well, until somebody volunteers, we go on to the next question. Tarindur Anasingh asks, during your studies, did you observe any specific pollinators of this plant group, especially in rainforest species?
Very good question. I did not, all those years ago, I was just trying to get the taxonomy straight. So, and rattans was so unknown at that time, just being able to study them itself was a challenge. for a long time, people thought that palms were wind pollinated, but of course we know now that they are mostly insect pollinated. So I think that's a really important aspect, that if somebody is interested in studying as to what kind of native pollinators do visit these flowers, would be really important. I have seen beetles and I've seen all kinds of bees, but I have no idea what their identity is. So maybe there are some entomologists here who might be interested in taking it on.
There's a question regarding the dothalu, whether there's a possibility of cultivating them commercially to use for religious purposes using tissue culture. So that we come back to tissue culture again, which we are unable to answer at the present time. Pradeep says that Areca consina is protected species on the FFPO. Is the palmyrah leaf also used to make ola leaves for writing?
Yes, that's what I mentioned, that they say that it goes back some 6,000 years, including the Sanskrit alphabet and many other, documents written on the palmyrah leaves.
Do you have any
question, Mali? Question about Randothalu. We have seen Randothalu is growing in forest fringe home gardens very well. If you go to Singaraja and Nathal, and even in the wet zone area, home gardens, it's growing very well. And if somebody is interested to sell these flowers and make some money, of course they can plant it. Also, I have seen some ants are pollinating Randothalu flowers. Maybe there's a sweetener there in the flowers or something. I don't know. Red color and slightly smaller than our normal red ants, which is Dimia. That's also interesting if somebody is interested to look at
Yeah, we can talk about that, Vimukti, sometime. I have read that when you see ants on flowers, they're usually not pollinating. They have a lot of antibacterial chemicals on them. And so they're either there because the plant is producing some extra floral nectar to protect the inflorescence from predators, and the ants are providing that service. And other times there are thrips and other insects, aphids that it is milking. So the ant seems to have different roles outside of pollinators, but I'm just talking in general, it's, who knows, never know with the endemic genus what kind of very highly specialized relationships they are, and that these ants may be pollinating, but it would be worth looking at.
Yeah, absolutely. So many different, Sorry. The pollinators.
I asked about the palmyrah being used for Ola. I know that the talipot is definitely used for Ola, but is the palmyrah also used?
Yes, it is. And that's the one that they say goes back some 6,000 years. And the Sanskrit alphabet, when it was invented, is supposed to have been written on palmyrah leaves.
Not talipot.
No.
Vimukti, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say that the pollinators part is extremely interesting because many times when we were taking some pictures of the flowers, you could see different types of insects. Pollinators are in large numbers circling around these flowers. And during the flowering time, if somebody is interested, of course, that's the best way to go and sit there and look at it. But we have not seen any pollinators around rattan flowers. So that's the very interesting part. I don't know, we need to pay a little more attention to the flowering season, or maybe flowers of rattans to see whether there's any flowers. I mean, there may be some insects that are visiting the flowers at night. Who knows?
Yeah, I
That's why
have seen beetles, weevils, quite a few insects, but no one has really identified them. I don't know if some of these insects even have names. They may be new to science.
Thank you. We got on to the next question. It's about promoting plant-based traditional industries in Sri Lanka, especially in rural areas, as community-based conservation approach.
So what was the question?
Do you have any idea about promoting palm-based traditional industries in Sri Lanka?
I mean, I can only speak for rattan. And as I said, because many of these are not regulated, overexploited. So even the Calamus rattan, which was most available rattan growing in the floodplains that supported our rattan industry, is now near threatened. So I think, to me, the first answer would be that before we promote the industries, we would just have to figure out how to manage the plants, or whether there's enough plants. Because if we promote an industry and there's not enough of a plant base, it will just get overexploited. So that is a bit, will undermine the whole purpose.
But I think one thing that I want to say that, can you remember, Neela, when 1980s you were trying to promote the larger diameter rattans plantations as an undergrowth of pine plantation in the west zone of Sri Lanka, and some of the what do you call, the sampling plots, which you have done, I don't know, 30 years ago, maybe 40 years ago, has grown into a different level. I mean, you can commercially harvest it now. I can see that, but nobody has gone to that level. And the main idea of that project, that initiative, was to see the potential of introducing palms into a commercial cultivation. And there are so many pine plantations in the west zone of Sri Lanka, but the Forestry Department has not gone beyond the trial plots to expand this Calamus plantation into the. I mean, we could have done that easily, and then the harvesting cycle is very short in terms of rattans. So kitul can be used as some sort of commercially viable palm tree in Sri Lanka, because it has a huge demand for kitul products. I'm not sure whether anybody is looking at in kind of a. Just my thoughts.
Thank you, Vimukti. There's a question from Jayewardenepura about the availability of volume 14 of the revised Flora. Is it available for purchase? Because he hasn't got it in his library. Any idea, anyone? Whether volume 14 of the revised Flora can be purchased anywhere?
I think Pradeep has already replied.
Yeah, I was going to ask Pradeep.
What has he replied?
He has said to contact him for help.
Okay, I will connect the two of you. Or you could go to the, Priyanta, you can go to the Flora of Sri Lanka website, which Pradeep Rajateva is the founder. I highly recommend that website to everyone here. And you can contact him through the Flora of Sri Lanka at gmail.com. Is that right, Pradeep?
Pradeep has left, I think.
Okay. Yeah, I'll connect them. Okay, so thank you. Is that all the questions?
One more. Yes, I think that's the lot. I think that's the lot. Lester, would you like to take over and conclude the meeting, please?
Hi, Neela. It's been years. Thanks for the very illustrated and creative talk by you and Dilini. Sort of with your expertise, your connections to the forest department, I think
You're not very clear, Lester.
the connectivity is somewhat poor, I think. Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yeah.
much better.
So I know you initiated the rattan thing. You tried to do a lot there with the kitul palm commercial aspect of it long ago. But I think there's a massive demand for it. I think connections to the forest department. And,
You're inaudible again, Lester.
Okay, I think the connectivity.
Sorry, Lester. Lester, you cannot be understood. Can I take over and express thanks to Neela and Dilini for this enthralling presentation. You obviously taken a tremendous lot of trouble in making those slides very detailed and very knowledgeable. There were one or two questions about whether the recording would be available. Yes, we do edit and carry the recordings of our talks on our website, on our YouTube channel in a few days. There you are. So once more, thank you, Neela. Thank you, Dilini. And I do hope we have a chance of meeting in August, Neela, when you're here.
Yeah, I'd also like to thank Hiroshi and Harshada Sirivardhan also, who very kindly did the beautiful flyer and all the logistics for this meeting. So thank you.
Yes, Harshada and Dilini were hosting this meeting. Thank you, Harshada, Dilini. And,
Hiroshi.
Thank you. Hiroshi.
Hiroshi, not Dilini, Hiroshi. Sorry, Hiroshi. So good night, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thanks.